Hey guys, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're zeroing in on something that literally shapes every single interaction you have, whether you realize it's happening or not. We're talking about the psychology of nonverbal communication, status, and perceived authority. You know, we usually think authority comes from a fancy job title or the exact words we say. But man, the science tells a completely different story. We're going to unpack the subconscious, unspoken nonverbal cues that are actually pulling the strings and dictating who holds the real power in any given room.
Just think about a recent meeting or maybe a social get-together you went to. Who really held the power in that room? We naturally kind of assume it's the person doing all the talking or the one with the highest rank. But what if power isn't about what you say at all? What if true influence is all about how much physical space you claim, exactly where you look when you speak, and how you handle silence? It's like a hidden language. The dynamics of power are mostly invisible, written in this physical code that we all speak but honestly rarely ever study.
Okay, let's dive into this and map out the science of dominance and vulnerability. We'll be hitting 5 key areas. 1. The hidden language of influence. 2. The visual dominance ratio. 3. Claiming space and status. 4. The pratfall effect. And finally, 5. Balancing power and trust.
So, jumping right into Section 1, the hidden language of influence, decoding unspoken signals.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty behaviors, we really need to set the foundation here. A lot of social influence research focuses on linguistic choices, the exact words we use to try and persuade people. But trying to inspire change without mastering the nonverbal stuff, you're literally only fighting half the battle. Just to ground this in some hard science, consider this staggering number. Classic research by Mehrabian found that when a person's verbal and nonverbal messages clash, like their words are saying one thing but their body is screaming another, receivers will favor the facial nonverbal cues 55% of the time. The actual words, they only account for 7% of liking. Basically, people trust what they see, not what they hear.
So, power usually expresses itself in 4 main ways. First up is kinetics, which is all about your eye contact and physical movement. Then there's proxemics, or the actual physical space you take up. Third is your physical appearance and artifacts. Think clothes, watches, status symbols. And finally, chronemics, which is the use of time. Now, chronemics is super fascinating because it scientifically proves that whole time is money idea. Research shows that our perception of time is completely tied to status. The more important we think someone is, the more of our own time we're willing to just give them. Which leads us to Section 2, the visual dominance ratio. How your gaze actually dictates your rank.
Absolutely one of the most potent weapons in your body language arsenal is eye contact. But here's the kicker. It is not just about staring someone down. It's about the exact timing of when you look at them. Back in 1988, DeVideo and his team looked at the visual behavior of mixed-sex pairs interacting in a lab. They set these pairs up so that they had complementary areas of expertise. So in one setup, the man was the expert on the topic, and in another, the woman was the expert. The researchers tracked exactly where these folks looked while they were speaking and where they looked while they were listening.
Now, what's really interesting about this is it brings us to a crucial concept called the visual dominance ratio. To put it simply, it's the ratio of how much you look at someone while you're speaking compared to how much you look at them while they're speaking. In a totally normal, everyday conversation, people usually look more when they're listening, and they tend to look away more when they're speaking. But the researchers found that high-power individuals, they completely flip this script.
The findings were honestly pretty stark. When someone was in the high expertise or high-power role, and this was regardless of whether they were a man or a woman, they displayed a really high visual dominance ratio. They commanded the room by looking directly at their partner while speaking, but then they'd casually look away more often when listening. On the flip side, the low expertise participants averted their gaze while talking, but stared super attentively while listening. So essentially, holding your gaze while talking says, "I expect to be heard," while breaking gaze while listening suddenly signals that you hold the higher rank.
Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds. Claiming space and status, the Loeffler study.
All right, so we know how gaze operates, but how does power actually translate into the physical three-dimensional space around us? Well, in a really cool experiment from 1982, Loeffler and her colleagues randomly assigned people to act as either teachers, which was the high-status role, or students, the low-status role. The shifts in their behavior were immediate and dramatic. The high-status teachers physically claimed way more direct space with their bodies, leaning over the table. They talked more, they interrupted more, and they did what researchers call symbolic intrusions. That basically means they'd point right at the student and casually touch the student's stuff.
On the flip side, the low-status students yielded their space, didn't intrude at all, and laughed way more frequently as a sort of subconscious appeasement gesture.
This is a perfect illustration of proxemics, which basically breaks our physical space into 4 measurable zones. Think about your own invisible bubble for a second. The intimate zone is touch out to about 18 inches. That's strictly for close friends and family. The personal zone is 18 inches to 4 feet for colleagues and everyday conversations. The social zone is 4 to 8 feet, mostly for strangers. And public is anything over 8 feet. High-status people have this innate ability to just comfortably penetrate these zones and dictate the spatial boundaries of an interaction. It makes the other person subconsciously acknowledge their authority without a single word being said.
But wait, here is Section 4, the pratfall effect, the vulnerability twist.
So if you just take all those high-status cues we just talked about, staring people down while you speak, claiming all the physical space, pointing at their things, yeah, you might establish dominance, but you're also going to become completely insufferable. Absolute competence actually creates distance. As the psychology publication Mental Zone puts it, displaying both competence and a hint of vulnerability can be the secret to becoming instantly likable and trustworthy. This is the total opposite of pure dominance. The research makes it super clear that while competence might command respect, it's that genuine human touch that actually builds real trust.
And this brilliantly illustrates what psychologists call the pratfall effect. Back in a classic 1966 study, researchers had people listen to an audio recording of someone answering quiz questions perfectly. The listeners thought the guy was super smart, but maybe a bit intimidating, right? But then, the researchers added a little recording at the end of that same genius, clumsily spilling a cup of coffee all over himself. Suddenly, his likability and trustworthiness ratings absolutely skyrocketed. That tiny minor imperfection made this highly competent person seem so much more approachable and human.
Bringing it all together in Section 5, Balancing Power and Trust, the ultimate form of influence.
Because the ultimate form of influence isn't just about dominating a room and steamrolling people, it's about crafting this magnetic authority where people actually want to follow you. So how do we actually apply this stuff? Step 1 is non-negotiable. You've got to first establish clear expertise and competence. Use that strong visual dominance ratio and maintain confident posture. Then, Step 2. Once you've earned that respect, reveal a subtle, contextually appropriate imperfection, maybe a bit of self-deprecating humor. Just be warned, the sources explicitly note that being excessively clumsy will still completely undermine your credibility. It has to be balanced. Finally, Step 3. Use that vulnerability to foster a real emotional connection and empathy, proving that behind all that high status, you are authentically human.
Nailing this balance between strong, nonverbal authority and genuine human vulnerability is the true secret to the authority paradox. So, I want to leave you with this to think about. How will you balance your own competence with a little bit of vulnerability in your very next interaction? Be mindful of the space you take, where your eyes go, and the humanity you show. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe.